to treat PFAS either. So some of those PFAS pass through into surface waters, impacting drinking water sources and fish that we might consume. And some of the PFAS might accumulate in the wastewater treatment plant sludges, which, when they are land applied as biosolids, could impact agricultural fields, the soils, the groundwater and surface water runoff, maybe even crops. And so our challenge is to understand the occurrence of PFAS throughout this cycle so that we can break it and protect public health. Next slide, please. And so, MPART is taking very deliberate action to protect the public's water. And we start with surface water investigations, where we have integrated PFAS testing into the surveys that we've been doing all along in our rivers and streams and lakes, looking for persistent toxins. And that helps us identify sources that we can then have reduce the pollutant loads on those water bodies. The same thing with fish, where they're accumulating in fish, that identifies where we need to be looking for sources. We've also found high concentrations of PFAS in foams on surface waters that are impacted by PFAS contamination. And that helps us then, when we see those foams, to know that we might want to start looking for other sources in water bodies across the state. And our wastewater program has worked with the wastewater treatment plants as they look upstream to their industrial users, identifying where some of them might have high concentrations going into the wastewater treatment plant and catching those before they make it there. So that way, again, that it doesn't make it out into the surface waters or impact those biosolids that could be land applied. Next slide, please. As part of protecting the public's water, we've gone right to testing drinking water. Michigan is the first state in the country to test all of our public water supplies to get a better understanding of what the occurrence of PFAS are and what we might need to do about it. And we began that back in 2018 and have been doing some ongoing monitoring to better understand, especially in some systems where we might have found some concentrations that require further monitoring, and or looking at the surface water systems that might be more apt to have fluctuating levels. Next slide, please. And this is really an oversimplification of the data that we've received over the past couple of years, but it makes the point of a couple of things. We looked for 14 compounds, and if you look at the pie chart here, 90% of the systems that we've tested didn't have any reportable concentrations of any of those 14 compounds. Another 7% had less than 10 parts per trillion of all of the concentrations of all 14 of those added together. And that was a concentration that MPART decided, based upon all the science available to us, that really didn't need any immediate response if the total of all 14 was less than 10 parts per trillion. But if nothing else, we wanted to continue to monitor to better understand. 3%, around 60 supplies initially, and I think now we have about 80 plus or minus, have something higher than that 10 parts per trillion total of all 14 analyzed, but less than the 70 part per trillion EPA lifetime health advisory level. And that level, 70 parts per trillion, has been used by MPART to make recommendations to water systems on whether or not they needed to take action. So those 3% at a minimum have been doing groundwater, or doing quarterly monitoring. In fact, MPART has done that. They've notified their customers, been looking at what potential sources there might be in their area causing that contamination, as well as whether or not any longer term changes might be needed to their systems to reduce those levels. Next slide, please. And having found PFAS in our drinking water, that led us to understand that we needed to do something about it longer term, rather than just these one sets of data points for all these systems that MPART had gone out and done. We wanted to integrate this into what the water system operators do. Typically, we look to the federal government for standards that we can then adopt. And EPA at this point in time has a plan to do that, but it's going to be many years from now. At the same point in time, after knowing that we've got it in our water supplies and need to monitor for it, we had our scientists tell us a couple of years ago that that 70 part per trillion lifetime health advisory was probably too high, and we should be looking for more than just 2 compounds that for PFOA and PFOS. There's others out there that we should be looking at. And so Michigan last year launched a 2-step approach to develop our own standards. We went to another group of scientists and asked for recommendations on health-based values for any of the PFAS compounds that there was sufficient evidence out there on health-based effects. And Eagle then promulgated standards based on those. And you can go to the next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier, all PFAS aren't the same and don't behave the same. And here you can see these are the levels of PFAS that the public water supplies will now be monitoring for and taking action if they're found over time to be exceeding these concentrations. And they range from 6 parts per trillion to 400,000 parts per trillion. I also want to point out that compared to that 70 parts per trillion lifetime health advisory level, which was really just a recommendation, we now have enforceable criteria at 8 parts per trillion for PFOA and 16 parts per trillion PFOS. Next slide, please. And what's important to note as well is that those criteria for 7 compounds don't translate directly into cleanup criteria. And so we do have, though, groundwater cleanup criteria for 2 compounds, PFOA and PFOS, that were based on that 70 parts per trillion. And those now have become, by rule, the lower criteria of 8 parts per trillion and 16 parts per trillion. Those other 5 compounds that we showed, those are going to have to go through a rulemaking before they become enforceable groundwater cleanup criteria in Michigan. But it's really important to note that not only for clarification of what standards we look for, but it's also how we define a PFAS site. Next slide, please. So we have been defining PFAS sites as those that exceed the groundwater cleanup criteria, which on August 3rd changed from 70 parts per trillion total PFOA and PFOS to 8 and 16 parts per trillion for those 2 compounds. So we went from 99 sites to 138 sites overnight just by the change in the definition of criteria. And a little bit about these sites is that these are locations, they could be, old industrial sites, military installations, landfills, any number of locations where we've known or suspected there might be PFAS, and we've prioritized where we're looking based upon potential impacts to offsite sources of drinking water. And, so you may have seen that Michigan has got a lot of sites the way we define them, and it's really important to note that Michigan isn't contaminated more than anybody else. It's really that we are looking more aggressively than anybody else in the country. Next slide, please. And lastly, I want to end with this is, we have all of these sites across the state and we're looking for many more. And MPART is trying to be as transparent as we can. And that's one of the reasons we have this webinar tonight, is to inform residents what we know, what we don't know, and what our next steps are. And to help ensure that we're doing a best possible job at that, MPART established a Citizens Advisory Work Group. And this is residents from impacted communities from around the state are offered the opportunity to participate in this advisory group to help us understand how best to engage and empower impacted communities, as well as how to educate or inform the general public on PFAS and the work of MPART. And so at the end of this slide presentation, you'll see a link to the MPART site. And if you go to the advisory groups portion of that under the MPART tab, you'll see a simple way just to let me know if you're interested in participating. And it's just a registration form. And this group right now consists of 28 people. I'm really encouraged about their leadership and interest in helping MPART and their fellow citizens across the state. And all are welcome. We meet virtually every month, second Tuesday of every month during the evening in a format similar to this to go over what MPART is doing and to find ways where we can do better. So Again, I thank you very much for the opportunity here. Let's move on then. I think Lisa might be next. So Lisa, I'll hand off to you. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Steve. Hi, my name's Lisa Fisher. I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and I'm going to briefly discuss what DHHS's role is in PFAS investigations, how people can be exposed to PFAS, and some of the health outcomes that are associated with PFAS exposure. Next slide. So the role of MDHHS, along with the local health department, is to understand your community and to determine how to best serve your community. So while EGLE leads the site investigation, DHHS and the local health department lead the public health response. And based on the results of the sampling that occurs, we'll offer you recommendations on how to prevent or limit your exposure to PFAS if needed. Next slide. So people can be exposed to PFAS a number of different ways. Like Steve talked about, PFAS is found in a lot of products. But one of the main pathways is by drinking contaminated water. So we talk a lot about sampling residential wells and public water supplies. But some other ways that you could be exposed to PFAS would be by eating fish that are caught in contaminated water bodies. And if you visit the MPART webpage, which we'll talk about later, there is a list of water bodies throughout the state that have fish consumption advisories in place due to PFAS contamination. So you can check that out later. Some other routes of exposure include incidental swallowing of dirt or dust, eating food that's packaged in materials that contain PFAS, and through the use of consumer products. And absorption of PFAS through the skin is typically not a concern. There have been a few areas throughout the state that have issued advisories to avoid foam on lakes and rivers due to high PFAS levels, but generally PFAS absorption through the skin is not a concern. Next slide. So because PFAS is commonly found in so many consumer products, it's not a big surprise that most Americans have some level of PFAS in their blood. And since 2002, the production and use of PFOS and PFOA has decreased, which you can see reflected in the blood levels. So this is a chart that shows blood levels of the most common PFAS in Americans between 2000 and 2014. And you can see that right in between the years 2000 and 2004, there's a pretty sharp decrease in the amount of PFOS. However, manufacturers have replaced PFOA and PFOS with other PFAS, which typically have shorter half-lives, but the science is still emerging on any associated health outcomes with those PFAS. Next slide. So adverse health effects have been established in epidemiological and laboratory animal model studies for certain PFAS chemicals. And adverse health effects in humans associated with higher PFAS exposure from these epidemiological studies are provided in this slide. For those of you on the phone, that includes kidney and testicular cancer, elevated cholesterol levels in serum, endocrine effects, immune effects, and reproductive effects. And these effects are supported by studies in different human populations that were exposed to different PFAS, and a lot of those were from populations that were exposed to very high levels of PFAS. And basically what these adverse health outcomes show us is that participants in these epidemiologic studies who had high PFAS exposure had a higher rate of adverse health effects than those that had low levels of exposure. And it doesn't mean that everyone got them, some sort of health effect. Not all participants in these epidemiologic studies with high exposure had adverse health outcomes. And I think that's it for my slides.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, everyone. I am Mary Carnegie. I am the regional lead understudy for the Southeast Michigan region. I'm also a solid waste geologist and a site lead for a few of these PFAS sites. And I will be going through and introducing the new MPART sites that we will be discussing this evening. Your regional lead for MPART is Tracy Kexcometti, who is also the Materials Management Division District Supervisor. So she's the best person to go to with all questions PFAS. And as you can see, our region covers St. Clair, Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne counties. We'll be talking about 11 sites tonight, doing a brief overview. They're all located in Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne County. If you look through the list, you'll see predominantly they are landfills and manufacturers. So PFAS was involved in some sort of aspect of the manufacturing process, or in the case of landfills, end-of-life disposal of the PFAS products that Steve was describing. Just to give you an idea of what we'll be talking about, each of the slides will have a map and an address, why the site was sampled for PFAS, groundwater flow direction, a comment on residential wells, and if there's any surface water information for the site. At the end of the slides, we'll have the site lead contact information. They're the best people to contact directly with really the technical guts that you have any questions about for each of these sites. We also will have the local health department contact information. They have been critical partners in our investigations in these sites, especially regarding the residential wells. After that, we'll follow up with any questions that you may have, and hopefully we'll be able to answer those for you. Our first site is SMDA 11, which is located in Washington Township on Mound Road, north of 30 Mile, in Macomb County. This site is managed by Materials Management Division. It's a closed solid waste landfill. There's existing groundwater contamination at this site, which prompted Eagle to request them to sample for PFAS, which they complied with and found PFAS in the groundwater, which is the case with all of these sites. The groundwater flow direction is to the southwest south, and Eagle is working with Macomb County Health Department to determine a future residential well sampling plan. Another SMDA landfill, 99A in Macomb County, located on 24 Mile Road, west of North Avenue. This is a Superfund managed site, and also has a treatment system on site that has a Great Lakes Water Authority permit, and part of their permit requirement was to sample for PFAS. So that alerted us to its presence, and then Eagle requested groundwater sampling. This site has a very complicated geology. So we have, I apologize, I can't see my slide with my video on, so I'm going to turn that off. The groundwater flow direction is to the northeast and south-southwest predominantly. Currently, 9 residential drinking water wells are being evaluated for sampling. Collier Road Landfill is a closed solid waste municipal landfill in Pontiac, located on Collier Road, west of Joslin, south of I-75. This site has known groundwater contamination and off-site impacts, and was ranked as a high priority landfill by Materials Management Division. We requested that they sample the groundwater because there are impacts of other parameters. There are 2 aquifers in play at this site. The upper aquifer flows predominantly to the northeast, and the lower aquifer flows predominantly to the southeast. Currently, we are working with Oakland County Health Division to determine which residential wells will require sampling. There are 2 on-site stormwater detention ponds, and they discharge to Galloway Creek, which is just north of the site. And there's been no PFAS sampling in this water body to date. Next is the High Mill manufacturing site, managed by Superfund section, located in Highland Township on Highland Road, which is also M59, west of Duck Lakes Pine Park. Groundwater samples were collected in September 2019, and 2 of the monitoring wells exhibited exceedances for PFOA. The groundwater flow direction, this also has multiple aquifers in play. The shallow aquifer has radial flow, predominantly west-southeast. Radial means that it can flow in any direction, giving the season, rainfall, a lot of variables, but most often west-southwest, and the intermediate aquifer to the west. This area is served by the Highland Township municipal wells, which were sampled in 2018. Those results were non-detect, and there are no residential wells in use in the area. Michigan Seamless Tube is a manufacturing facility in South Lyon, just to the west of Lafayette Street on Macomb Street. This is managed by the hazardous waste section and is a corrective action site, which means that there was already some investigation going on. So that prompted the hazardous waste section to request PFAS sampling, and that was found in, exceedances were found in 2 of the monitoring wells. The groundwater flow direction at this site is to the southwest towards the York Strain, which is an ephemeral stream. An ephemeral means that it doesn't always have water in it and it's not always flowing, but there is significant water in it for a good portion of the year, so it's considered a connection to us. And there's no residential well sampling scheduled at this time. Oakland Heights Landfill is another solid waste landfill on Brown Road in Auburn Hills, just west of Lapeer Road. This was also a high priority landfill managed by Materials Management Division because other parameters of concern had already been detected in the groundwater. The groundwater flow direction here is to the south-southeast. It has a very flat gradient. And a flat gradient means that the groundwater moves very, very slowly. There's no known surface water connection at this site, and Eagle is working with Oakland County Health Department to determine a future residential well sampling plan. Reichhold Chemical is managed by the hazardous waste section. It's a corrective action site in Ferndale on Bermuda, east of Woodward, south of I-696. There was known contamination at this site beforehand, which prompted hazardous waste to request PFAS sampling, which showed an exceedance in 1 monitoring well on site. The groundwater flows to the northeast, but the groundwater on this site is contained by a containment wall along the property perimeter. This area is also served by municipal water, and there are no residential drinking water wells nearby. City Sand and Landfill is a closed solid waste landfill in Wayne County and Sumter Township on Willow Road between Elwell and Sumter Roads. This was also a high priority Materials Management Division landfill due to historic leachate releases and known groundwater impacts of other parameters. The groundwater flow for this site is to the southeast, also very slow groundwater flow in the bedrock aquifer. This area is served by municipal drinking water, and there are no residential wells nearby. The on-site stormwater pond discharges to Lord's Drain, which is to the southeast, and this surface water body has not been sampled for PFAS to date. Next site is Marathon Refinery in Detroit, right off of 75. So this site is RRD led site and became an MPART site due to a foaming incident in a sewer in Melvindale, which had RRD looking upstream in the sewer system to find potential contributors to the foaming incident, which was very clearly PFAS. So Marathon complied with our request to sample, and we found that the fire training area was a source, or is a source, of PFAS on site. The groundwater flow direction is to the northwest towards the northern property boundary drainage ditch. This area is served by municipal drinking water and no residential wells are nearby. The Rouge Manufacturing Complex in Dearborn is a hazardous waste corrective action site. located on Miller Road, just east of I-94, right along the Rouge River. This is also a hazardous waste corrective action site. They requested for PFAS sampling in 2019, and Rouge complied, and their groundwater flow direction is to the south towards the river. This area is also served by municipal drinking water, and no residential wells are nearby. Our last Wayne County site is Wayne Disposal Site 1 Landfill, which is located in Belleville off the I-94 service drive, just east of the Washtenaw and Wayne County border. To be clear, this is not the hazardous waste landfill. This is the closed industrial waste landfill. Again, they sampled their groundwater at our request and found PFAS above appropriate levels. The groundwater flow direction is to the south towards Belleville Lake. And this area is also served by municipal drinking water, and no residential wells are nearby. So as promised, here is the contact information for each of the sites. As you can see, some people are site leads for multiple sites, and there's more sites to come. So these people will certainly be on your speed dial. And as always, contact me, again, Mary Carnegie or Tracy Kexcometti, with any questions at all PFAS. We can always get you to the correct person. As I mentioned, here are the local health departments that have been critical in our success to the residential well sampling efforts and public health responses. And I'd like to thank them for that. And that is all I have for the sites. So this is our website that has all things PFAS related. And I would like to take a minute to take you to this website to just kind of give you a small demo and see all the things that you can see on there. So let me switch my screen real quickly. Okay, so when you click on michigan.gov PFAS response /PFAS response, this is your landing page. It'll take you to, all the most popular things, the things people are most looking for, some FAQs. You can also sign up for updates. We'll keep you in the loop. To run across the top just really quickly. So the health, this, Lisa was talking about the health effects and the studies that have been done. And here is a lot of the information that you could possibly want. We have also in Spanish and Arabic regarding the drinking water, different exposure routes, foam, stress, and other resources. For this drinking water tab, so there's an in your home section. This is if you are interested in getting a filter for your tap. Not all filters will filter PFAS. This gives you all the information you need for that. If you would like to sample your well, there's guidance on all of that. How to sample, the appropriate way to do it, laboratories that will do the testing. Additionally, as Steve mentioned, we are the only state to do a statewide sampling initiative. So if you would like to look at any of those data, those are all on here. I will click on one just so you can see. But yeah, so these are very large databases, obviously, and you can click through and look at the data for any of the samples that you would like. You can search by county, water supply, and it will give you that information. There's also frequently asked questions and an explanation of the MCLs, if there's any information you want to look on that. For the investigations tab, we have it broken down in areas of interest, PFAS sites, and watershed investigations. Areas of interest are listed, and you can get more information about any of those. The PFAS sites, which are the, I think, 138 Steve mentioned, are all on here. We have an interactive map that you can click around and take a look, what's in your area. And we also have watershed investigations, which have exhaustive timelines about all the sampling that's been done to date. Testing, we have all of these different options to see, different testing methodologies, what we've done, what you can do. I'm not going to click on those. That's a lot of information for you to dive in at your leisure. Fish and wildlife. This is where you can look for those eat safe fish advisories that Lisa was talking about. We also have done some sampling in deer. There's discussion of moving on to doing some duck sampling. That's really, the kind of the direction we're headed, since we're, such sportsmen and love our waterways here in Michigan. So we know that that's really important. We also have the foam tab, which tells you all about the foam you may witness and the foam that we use to save lives. Lastly is this MPART tab, which Steve mentioned, where you could sign up for to be a citizens advisory work group, and just all of the kind of organization and administrative things that go into MPART. All right, and I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. And with that, we are all set. Thank you everyone for your time. I'm going to hand it over to Jim now to get your questions answered.
All right, thanks, Mary. I'm just going to bring the presentation back to my screen here. All right, there we go. So, a couple things. All right, there we go. All right, so thanks, Mary. Good presentation. And at this point, what we're going to do is open it for questions. Just want to remind everybody about how to ask a question tonight. You can use the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar. You find that there, and you can type your question in, and we'll ask it to our panelists that are here tonight with us from our team. Also, you click the raise hand icon. If you do that, we will see that you have your hand raised, and we'll call on you and unmute your mic. If you're calling on the phone, and I know there's a few of you, several of you actually on the phone tonight listening in, if you have a question, you can type *9, and we will see your hand is raised via the phone, and we will call on you by your phone number. So I already got a couple questions in here. First question that we got, maybe, I don't know if Tracy or Mary wants to answer this one, but can you clarify which sites are located in the Rouge watershed, the Huron watershed, and the Clinton watershed?
Yeah, thanks, Marie, for that question. Hey, Jim, if you could go back in the slides to the map at the very beginning. Sure. I'm hoping between Mindy and I think we can do this on the fly, but to be fair, Marie, we don't have them organized that way in our map, but I think we can go back and take a look and point those out.
Which map were you wanting me to look at?
So at the very beginning of the presentation, Jim, there was a map of the 4-county area that showed dots for each of the new sites. But I will point out, let's remember, right? No. And Mary, maybe you can, I thought it was at the beginning. Maybe, my apologies, maybe it was at the end. Do you remember it was a 4?
It's at the beginning of the site presentation portion. Okay. The slide where Tracy, right there.
This. Yeah. I just want to point out though too, this map only shows the new sites that were listed as a result of these new MCLs and the couple that whose investigations were wrapping up right as we're doing this effort. There are, many more sites in Southeast Michigan that are not identified on this map. And Mindy, I don't know if you're feeling like maybe I might have overstated our abilities here because this map is pretty general, but I guess I'll point out, right, that obviously the Rouge manufacturing facility and, is in the lower part of the watershed. Marathon, their impact is through the Great Lakes Water Authority system, so that discharges directly to the Detroit River. Wayne Disposal is in the Huron. What do we have all the way down here to the south, guys, in South Wayne County?
It'd be easier, Tracy, to look at the list of sites.
Yeah, probably. Jim, you want to take us back 1 or 2 slides, maybe? Nope. Let's see.
We can come back to it if you want.
Yeah.
And if one of you want to bring it up on your screen, we can just
Okay.
share your screen. So I don't know if Melinda or Tracy or Mary wants to bring it up on your screen, and we'll just share your screen at that point. And you can show everybody. That might be easier.
Yeah, I'll drive, no problem.
All right, thanks, Mary.
Yeah,
So
I
I'll let you
apologize.
do
This
that.
is starting to feel like a little bit like a pop quiz. You know, and we're happy to get that information. I believe that question came from Marie at Friends of the Rouge. So if you know, we're happy to get that information to you. Mindy, do you want to take a stab at this so I stop fumbling?
Sure. So the Macomb County sites, oh, go back one, Mary.
Go back.
Oops. Jeez.
There we go. So both the South Macomb Disposal Authority sites would be the Clinton River watershed. I believe as would be the Collier Road landfill. High Mill Manufacturing Superfund site, I believe, would be Rouge. But if the site lead knows differently, please jump in. Michigan Seamless Tube is Huron. Oakland Heights Development Landfill. This one I don't know. Likely the
Clinton,
River,
right? The Clinton.
likely the Clinton River watershed. And the Reichhold East area, that's located in a combined area. So I would say any watershed impacts would be extremely limited and dictated by where the combined sewer system is directed towards. City Sand and Landfill, Tracy, did you mention that one would be Huron?
I believe so. Mary, does that sound right? I mean, that's the one.
Yep, Huron.
Western way. Yep.
And then you already talked about Marathon and Rouge, and the Wayne Disposal site, I believe, would also be Huron.
Yeah. Thanks, Mindy. I appreciate that.
All right, good. So when will comprehensive sampling take place in the Rouge watershed? And will there be a report like the other watersheds available?
Hi, this is Sarah Bowman. I'm a toxicologist with the Water Resources Division. And comprehensive sampling is going to take place in the Rouge. It's planned right now for October of 2020. We have a comprehensive plan put together to do sampling throughout the watershed. And there should be a watershed report that eventually will get uploaded on the website. It does take a little while to get the results back and then to do the QA/QC and prepare the report. However, the different divisions and districts within Eagle and our partners, they do look at the results quicker than the report comes out, and they use it to address source tracking and other issues.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Looking at my question box, we don't have any other questions right now. So if somebody wants to type in a question, if you have one, please do so. If you want to raise your hand, if you got a question about a specific site or PFAS in general, you know, you're more than welcome to ask it. That's why we're here. We've got a very large panel of staff from Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, from Eagle, DNR, Community Health. So a lot of people here to help you out. And when I said that, it's good. Looks like we got a couple people raise their hand. So I'm going to call on Peter Horal. Peter, we've unmuted your mic, so you can go ahead and ask your question. Peter, you just got to unmute your mic.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Great, thank you. Where can we get a copy of this recording in the future?
Yeah, so this recording, along with all the recordings from all the regional meetings, are going to be posted on the PFAS website. I don't know if Steve, you have more specifics on where on that website we're gonna put it, but it will be available right on that website. Okay. Next person with a question is Bradley Mendelson. Bradley Mendelson. Go ahead, we got you unmuted. You just need to unmute yourself.
Yep. Hi. My question is, when PFAS is detected, are the local governments where they are, where it's detected, are they notified in any way? And what's the notification process in terms of when the PFAS is detected and when there's notice sent out?
Yeah, Steve, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, great question. And so our process within MPART is when we get a result, and the result could be anything from residential wells to, you know, monitoring wells at an industrial site or surface water samples. We try to make sure that the local officials are kept informed. And I know it was mentioned earlier by, you know, Mary, that local health officials, if anytime there's a concern about exposures, especially in drinking water, you know, we contact local health officials right away as well. And so depending on, you know, where a site is in the process, there's always that initial outreach that's done from MPART agencies, typically as a team, reaching out first to local health and then to local municipal officials and making sure all of our elected officials are aware as well. And if any time that we're concerned about offsite migration, we also will do something like this to hold now it's a virtual town hall, to let residents know that we are concerned about the potential exposures off-site from a source we've identified, and that we'll be doing some residential well testing. And so we'll get this whole team that's on here today and maybe some others on a virtual town hall to answer any questions people might have, and to explain, you know, what our steps are and what the response will be based upon the results. So that's our goal, is to make sure that everybody is kept informed along the way, to be as transparent as we possibly can. And as you know, and you've heard here tonight, to make sure that we keep the website up to date in between any of these virtual conferences, for example. So every one of the sites that are out here today that we've talked about, plus all the ones that had been existing sites prior to, you know, us finding these more recently, that's all out on the website. And so our staff try to keep those up to date as data comes in, which may not be weekly or monthly, but as data comes in, we make sure that it's up to date.
All right, thanks, Steve. Hang on, we got another question for you probably want to answer. What sources of funding are there to address these compounds?
It's all state funds, taxpayer dollars. And we've been fortunate over the past several years that we've had support from our legislature and administration. And the first 2 years of MPART's efforts across the state, I think we had over $50 million appropriated. And as you can well imagine, that's a lot of money. It's also a lot of work to do all of this investigation and to provide a public health response in cases where we found exposures. And now at this point in time as well, we've got monies coming in that are being, you know, funneled through the various agencies in MPART. And, you know, we're trying to integrate this work into all of our program work going forward as we do with any other contaminant. So it's being handled by the state.
All right, thanks, Steve. Going back to the watershed question, I don't know if Mindy or Tracy want to answer this one. Person's got questions about how can watershed groups assist with these efforts?
Sure, I'll take the first stab at it. So I think one good way a watershed group could assist is in helping get the word out for the public, particularly in those areas where there's a fish advisory or a foam advisory. And that way could be really useful in making sure that people are aware of what precautions they need to take.
And I'll also add to that is, you know, participating with MPART. And so in a couple of ways. One of them is, you know, Daniel Brown, I think he's on tonight with the Huron River Watershed Council. He actually is a member of our Citizens Advisory Work Group as well. And that's really helpful to us. And not only that he's that link directly back to his council, but a lot of great feedback to MPART on our efforts to try to keep people informed. But as well as, you know, across the state, and as we do more investigation work, it becomes clear in certain parts of the state that we need to start talking about what we're finding from on a watershed basis, on a watershed level, because that helps put the complete picture out that it's not just groundwater or drinking water or surface water. It's all of the efforts in fish that we're doing these investigations on. And so as our work evolves in these areas, you know, we may be able to go back to a watershed council and ask for some assistance in trying to put together these updates and making sure that folks are kept informed and then to participate in updates that we've done in the past.
Hey,
Hey,
thanks. Yeah.
Hey, Steve, this is Tammy Newcomb. Can I address that question as well?
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah, sure. Tammy, you want to put your camera on and introduce yourself too? Because
Oh, sure, you bet. Oh, let me do this right now. Sorry. Getting there.
Okay, there you are.
Can you see me now?
Yep.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Tammy Newcomb, and I am the Senior Water Policy Advisor with the Department of Natural Resources. So our role really is a supporting role to the agencies who are doing the investigations, EGLE and the regulatory folks, and then the DHHS folks in terms of their public health notifications and consumption advisories. What the DNR does is we provide things for them to sample or to test, and then we also help with communicating the message. And I think from years of work with the watershed groups, one of the things that we could really use help with is getting the word out related to the consumption advisories and understanding those consumption advisories. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there in terms of, well, if somebody's fishing, it's a bad thing in one of these PFAS waters. Not everybody keeps and eats their fish. I think that's an important thing to know, particularly when it comes to the smallmouth bass fishery. But some people do. And so if the watershed groups can help inform their members using our Eat Safe Fish website that the DHHS has put together, and if you need help with that, we can help out as well in terms of deciphering, but I think it's a really good website, really good resource. So if the watershed groups could please help inform their memberships as it may be appropriate related to the fish consumption advisories and that the actual act of fishing is still an okay thing to do, we'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tammy. All right, this one might be for Lisa from DHHS. What treatments have been shown to metabolize these compounds? The prevalence of cholecystitis and gallstones, I'm sorry, I might be mispronouncing this, has been steadily rising, inevitably leading to colonectomy, presumably related. Lisa, I'll let you just answer this. So I don't know if you got you there?
I'm here.
Can you see that question?
Let me pull it up.
Yeah, it's the first one on there. And I'm sorry, but
yeah, so like we said, you know, PFAS is a huge family of different compounds, and they don't all behave the same way. So I wouldn't want to generalize how they're metabolized, but I do know that they don't break down very easily in the body. So I can't speak specifically to those gallbladder issues. That's kind of what I have. Sorry.
okay, thanks. I got a specific question about the marathon site. So I don't know, Joe's on and Tracy's on, I think too. Is the PFAS at the marathon site in any way also related to the repaving of their parking lot that produced a chemical flow on one of the roads nearby over a year ago or so?
Hey, Tracy, I can take this.
Yeah, sure.
If it's the parking lot that's to the northwest, that parking lot belongs to Norfolk Southern. If it's the parking lot that I believe is more towards the south, PFAS has not been associated with that as far as I know, but I can do a little bit more investigation on that, and I can give Alex the information if he leaves his contact information. But as far as I know, if it's the parking lot that is Marathon's parking lot directly to the south of their property, PFAS is not related to the flow that came off site a year or so ago.
Hey, Jim, can I just add to that a little bit? Can you hear me? You guys can hear me.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Thanks, Joe, for that. I just want to, for folks that it sounds like maybe the person asking the question is pretty knowledgeable about the site. I just, for everyone else's benefit, a little bit more detail. I think a lot of people remember the news coverage of the foaming sewer in Melvindale. I think that was, Joe, was that the summer of 2018, I believe. And it was the foaming of that sewer, you know, that led to the investigation that had us identifying Marathon as an MPART site. Marathon is not solely responsible for that foaming, but what we found is that that foaming was coming out of a combined sewer system operated by the Great Lakes Water Authority, and there were several facilities upstream. So Eagle Water Resources Division and Remediation Division staff did an investigation in that sewer and found a number of facilities that could be contributing PFAS to that sewer system, and Marathon is one of those. I know there was also a freshly paved parking lot at the rail yard that was brought into question as a possible source there. I guess I just wanted to point out that's how we came across Marathon, is through investigating that sewer event.
All right, and while you guys stay on there, maybe Sean might want to join in this one too, because we got another question related to this site. It says, has Eagle already required the Marathon facility or the Rouge manufacturing complex to reduce the concentrations of PFAS they currently discharging in their effluent? Or are they only being required to study the contamination at the present moment?
So I can try to take that since it talks about two different facilities. And I think what this question is getting at is our industrial pretreatment initiative and the work that Water Resources is doing with all of our publicly owned treatment works. And so both of these facilities discharge processed waters, industrial wastewaters to the Great Lakes Water Authority. And through their industrial pretreatment program, GLWA has required all of their industrial dischargers to identify sources of PFAS and reduce or eliminate them. So specifically, Marathon has done a number of things. They have switched out their AFFF foam from a C8 foam to a C6 foam, so a shorter chain AFFF foam that does not contain PFOS or PFOA. They've blocked off drains in buildings where AFFF is being stored. They've done a number of things as it relates to like storage of those materials and inventorying of those materials. So there's a lot of best management practices that the Great Lakes Water Authority has required Marathon to undertake to reduce the discharges into their sewer. And they're also sampling regularly their effluent. I think there's also some some treatability studies that are happening on their treatment system that discharges to GLWA. Folks that are familiar with the Rouge manufacturing complex know that's a very large facility that is both Ford and AK Steel, two separate companies operating on that in that complex. A few different facilities in that campus have industrial pretreatment permits from GLWA and have undertaken some different activities to reduce their PFAS discharges. They also are in a monitoring stage where they're monitoring their effluent regularly. I don't think we have the ability to turn over the panelist option here, but I know we do have some folks from GLWA on the line. I would encourage this person, you know, if they want any more information on that, to either get in touch with Steve Kaplicki at GLWA, or feel free to contact one of us and we can put you in contact if you're interested in any of those reports or any like, you know, more detail on what's being done on those sites.
Yeah, feel free to put your email into the question box with your question, and I'll forward it on to Tracy and the team. Okay, another question here related to, and this might be more general for Steve, maybe not, we'll see. It seems like there is decent monitoring taking place. How do you or will you identify future sites to test? And also, who is doing treatment to remove PFAS? This person said they've been on webinars on PFAS removal technology, but those are outside the US and it's happening in Michigan. Or is it happening in Michigan? And what specific technologies are being used here?
Okay, so a two-part question. So the first part is, if you recall that map of now it's 145 sites, those locations are basically pulled from a number of different resources available to us, suggesting that they might have PFAS chemistry that we should be concerned about. And so, for example, landfill leachate, most landfills have PFAS in their leachate if they're taking, municipal and industrial waste. And so if a landfill has known to have some leaking, for lack of a better term, in the past, then that would get a higher priority for getting testing done now versus a location where we're not aware of any releases. And same thing goes with metal plating facilities, airports, commercial airports where they've used or practiced with the aqueous film forming foam. Same thing for military installations. So we've just prioritized where we look. There's hundreds of more investigations going on across the state, and we just prioritize based upon which ones do we think are most likely to have some potential impacts, off-site impacts. And as well as some of these come up on us as people are doing their own investigations and let us know and come up with a result, and then we'll bring those into the MPART process as well. So now the cleanup options are pretty limited when it comes to PFAS in groundwater. Right now, the primary concern is getting the groundwater out. So there's what we call pump and treat systems, and running the collected groundwater through a granular activated carbon filter or some other sort of filtration process before discharging it back. And of course, that perpetuates the cycle that we talked about earlier, where that media that captured that PFAS has to be then disposed or somehow managed. And so it doesn't really break the PFAS down. We also have a couple of locations in the state where they're pilot testing the use of technologies where they inject granular activated carbon down into the groundwater to stop the plumes from moving. At least that's a temporary solution, and it deserves some more study. MPART has also been, promoting the development of destruction technologies, and many of those are kind of in their infancy or have been tried in different places. And application of those, again, would be to the extracted groundwater in the case of a site that had groundwater contamination. We haven't seen soils being excavated and disposed off-site. Right now, the primary concern is addressing the groundwater. You're right, I think Australia and a couple other countries have been working on the use of some destruction technologies as well.
Thanks, Steve. You want to hang out there for a second?
Sure.
And this might be, you might want to ask somebody else on the panel too this, but this person's asking about some people getting their drinking water from public springs. Do you test those sites around the states, public springs?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things, and then I might ask Ian to jump in depending on what the status of these are under the drinking water program. But again, we're systematically looking across the state to try to identify sources of contamination in groundwater. And then as we identify those locations, any drinking water uses around them that we think might be impacted, we're going to test outside of any other program requirements that might be underway. And if you go back to that pie chart as well, we can get some comfort from the fact that 90% of the results that we've gotten so far from testing drinking water in the state came back with non-detect results, and those are drinking water systems serving about 75% of Michigan's population. But we also know that we've got over 2 million people who are drinking groundwater out of a residential well. There's over 1 million residential wells out there, and so I'll ask Ian right now if he's still on to chime in on whether or not these springs, a public spring would have to comply with any of the new drinking water standards for PFAS and be tested on any routine basis?
Good thing, Steve. So basically, the new PFAS rules are going to apply to supplies that fall into a couple of different categories. So they're going to be public water supplies that are either what we would call a type 1 supply, which is a community water supply. It's a water supply that serves the same group of people all year long, or a non-transient, non-community type 2 water supply, which serves the same group of people for a certain portion of the year, about 6 months. If those springs that you're referring to fall into one of those categories, they're automatically going to be required under the Safe Drinking Water Act to do compliance monitoring and to check to see if PFAS levels exceed those MCLs that Steve referred to earlier, those maximum contaminant levels for those 7 compounds. So I guess the short answer is it depends. It depends on if they fall into those categories or not. But between what's being done under the Safe Drinking Water Act and the wider efforts of MPART to investigate and sample around known or suspect sources of PFAS contamination, there is a chance that they will be sampled. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. And if you want to stick around, we got a couple more questions come up here that you and Steve might want to be here for. This one, they're asking why Michigan's current PFAS quality standard limits are lower than many other states. And do we expect these limits to change by testing more PFAS compounds and adding new material to the list?
I'd say, Ian, go ahead.
I would ask Steve to start off on that one.
Okay. All right. Well, I think the simple answer is that, Michigan has tried to take a very data-driven, science-based approach. And as I mentioned earlier, we tested all of our public water supplies, and while we didn't find PFAS in a lot of them, we did find it in some. In fact, there were 3 systems where we had to take some immediate actions to protect public health and get people off of that water and onto alternate water. And that's significant. Our first priority is protecting public health. And so we've gone to 2 outside panels of experts and asked them about PFAS standards. And like I mentioned earlier, the first one told us that recommendation that comes out of EPA at the federal level is not low enough, given what the science in 2018 was telling us, and we weren't looking for enough compounds. So Ian runs a program that has an EPA method, an analytical method that everybody across the country uses. It's a nationally validated method, which is really important when you're talking about really small concentrations of PFAS. And so we asked a group of scientists last year to look at all of the compounds, 14 of them at the time, that were analyzed with that method, and tell us which of those there's sufficient defensible scientific information, peer-reviewed information out there to support drinking water standards that could then be integrated into Ian's program. And they came back and told us 7 of those compounds had enough peer-reviewed defensible science to support standards, which was anywhere from 6 to 400,000 parts per trillion. And on a side note, that report, and it's available on that website that Mary ran you through, is, they tell us that all the states are looking at the same data and all coming to similar conclusions. We may not have the exact same number. Somebody might have a 9, somebody might have a 13, somebody might have a 20, but we're all trending in the same direction. And we're all starting to look at more compounds. And they also told us to have some sort of a routine system in place to reevaluate the science, because it's evolving quickly, and you'll find that with contaminants of emerging concern. And that may prompt us to reduce or change those numbers for the existing PFAS standards we have, and it may also lead us to promulgate standards for additional PFAS compounds in drinking water. And here, I know we're just talking about PFAS standards in drinking water. We also have them for groundwater, like I mentioned earlier, and we have surface water quality criteria. All are looking at the latest science out there to determine what is going to be the most protective, appropriate criteria to use. So Ian?
Yeah, I would just add, Steve, that my unit that I head up within the Drinking Water Environmental Health Division, we're the emerging contaminants unit, and our whole existence is based on the idea that it's our job to look for what is emerging, what's next, including additional PFAS compounds, but also including other contaminants and issues statewide as they affect drinking water. I don't want to speak too much for the other divisions and the other departments across the state, but I do know that there are similar units and groups being stood up and operating in those departments and Eagle divisions as well.
Okay, Ian, thanks. Can you answer this one too? Is C6 PFAS safer than C8? And can you explain what those are?
Well, I'll start by explaining what they are. So the C stands for carbon, and the 6 would stand for the number of carbons in the PFAS chain. There are more than one version of each of those. So it's a pretty general question, and I'm not sure I have an answer for whether C6 is safer than C8. Not to hedge too much, but safe could mean a number of different things. And if we're getting into health safety, I would need to pass that question off to my colleagues in MDHHS. But in general, I don't really have an answer to that one.
Thanks. And Lisa's there. So Lisa, you want to take that rest of that?
Yeah, and it is a pretty general question just because there are so many PFAS that are either C6 or 6.8. Well, easy for me to say, C6 or C8. In general, and this is just general, but the shorter the carbon chain length is, the shorter the half-life is. That's not always the case. But I just wanted to say that, generally a shorter half-life means it's, going through your body at a quicker rate than something that has a longer half-life, which is generally better. But it's hard to make any assumptions beyond that.
Yeah, thanks. Then you guys can both stay up here, I guess, for this next one too. How is an individual person's lifetime concentration determined? What does that really mean for an individual to have a 70 ppt, parts per trillion, or greater lifetime concentration?
So I can start. So the EPA's Lifetime Health Advisory, what they mean when they say lifetime is based on 70 years of exposure. So I think that's what that question was getting at, unless there was something else.
No, they're just asking, how is an individual's lifetime concentration determined? Does that really mean for an individual to have a 70 parts per trillion or greater lifetime concentration? So I think 70 parts per trillion is not referring to the lifetime concentration, referring to the regulatory concentration. Is that the difference here, or what are we maybe talking about?
I think they might be asking about how the Lifetime Health Advisory was kind of created or developed, which EPA does have a pretty comprehensive document for both PFOA and PFOS that talk about how the health advisory guidelines are developed. And generally for a lifetime health advisory, they're taking into account that someone has been exposed to levels for 70 years. And they're also taking into consideration very conservative values for water ingestion rates and body weights. So those are just a couple of the things that go into how the EPA develops those lifetime health advisories.
Okay. Thank you both. This looks like more of maybe a local question. Has there been any PFAS sampling of drinking water wells near the Smiths Creek, aka St. Clair County landfill? We are aware that there is PFAS and a leachate at the landfill, but hear little about whether it has been contained at the landfill. So I don't know who our Smiths Creek person is.
Yep, this is Mary Carnegie. Smiths Creek is one of my landfills. Smiths Creek, at our request, conducted groundwater sampling on site, and all of those wells came back non-detect. So with that information, there is no reason to conduct residential well sampling.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mary. Going back to Marathon site, why did Marathon change from C8 to C6? So we just got done talking about the two different types of PFAS, C8 and C6. Why did Marathon change from C8 to C6? I don't know, something that's Tracy or Joe or someone else wants to take. Tracy?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that, or Joe, if you want to hop on, I don't know if you have more detail. As I understand it, that's part of the best management practices that they implemented in response to the Great Lakes Water Authority's violation notice. But as I understand it, the new firefighting foam that they have on site now does not contain PFOS or PFOA. So it was an effort to reduce those discharges to the sewer system in the event that those materials, are ever used. I guess I'll add one thing to my earlier comments. I should have added one of the things Marathon has committed to doing is that they are no longer training with PFAS containing foam. They're not doing maintenance activities. It's really typical for chemical plants and airports previously to train with these firefighting foams, and that's pretty much across the board. We're seeing facilities stop training with this material so that it's not getting into the environment unless it has to for a life-saving event. Joe, did I get that close? Is there anything more to say about that?
Nope, you answered it perfect. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And I did get someone here that typed in, Tracy, you mentioned earlier about questions for the Great Lakes Water Authority pretreatment program. They're saying here that questions for the Great Lakes Water Authority pretreatment program should be emailed to, and they gave us an email address. The email address is iwc@glwater.org. So if you got questions about Great Lakes Water Authority pretreatment program, email it to iwc@glwater.org. And they're saying they generally will respond within 48 hours.
Yeah, thanks to Steve Kaplicki for putting that in the chat. Thanks for attending tonight.
Yep, thanks, Steve. I'm not seeing any more questions right now on my question board, and I do not see any hands raised. So I'll give you all a minute in case you have a question that you'd like to bring up.
Hey, Jim, I see a question here in the Q&A about more detail about the investigation at the Ford Rouge complex. So I think you have it up on the screen right now. If that person, the person that put that question in, could contact Joe Rogers. He's here on our contact list. He is the site lead for the the Rouge manufacturing complex. He's been overseeing that corrective action, consent order and remedial investigation for over 20 years. So he's a great person to talk to. And if you want copies of reports, he can provide all of that to you.
Yep. All the contact information is listed right on your screen there. And a couple people have asked about recordings of this presentation. Yes, we will be posting it on the PFAS website, michigan.gov/PFAS response. It's not up there yet. It's going to take us a little bit to get it up there. And, likely what we'll do is send everybody who attended, if we have your email, we'll send you an email and let you know when those are posted, just so you know. A question just came in, going back to the very first slide. The very first slide mentioned fluorine. Is there any correlation to the toxic fluoride in our water? Are PFAS levels lower if there is no fluoride in the water?
I guess I can tackle that one. So PFAS is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's different than the chemical fluoride. So I don't have any correlations to that.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Next question, I guess this would probably be more of a Steve question, Steve Sliver. Is there any plan to limit or ban usage of PFAS in non-essential products in Michigan?
You know, we in MPART and in national associations working with other states have been looking at those policy questions, everything from, you know, should we ban these firefighting foams that have PFAS in them? And there's been some legislation introduced on banning PFAS in food packaging. And so there's a number of different, I guess, policy initiatives that are out there across the country, some of them very similar in each one of the states. Michigan has not moved forward on adopting those yet, but those are all under consideration. And I think it's really just a matter of understanding, you know, what the consequences are of that. And, you know, for example, the firefighting foams, you know, banning the use, is there an acceptable, suitable protective substitute out there yet? And so you'll see some states that have banned practicing with the firefighting foams, but they're still available for use in saving lives and critical infrastructure. And so you'll also see nationally industries like the Food Packaging Association are looking at voluntarily phasing out PFAS in some of their food packaging products as well. I can't tell you the exact timeline on that, but those are really important policy questions so that we don't keep adding PFAS back into the environment. And I think right now is what is the most practical way of limiting further contamination, the pollution prevention aspects of that. So that is on our radar. It's something we're looking at. I think it's just a matter of, you know, finding the right approach for the right PFAS compounds at the right time.
All right, Steve, thank you. And I'm just checking my questions. Got a couple people that have asked for some contact information, which is good. We'll forward that along. Other than that, I am not seeing anything else. So I guess I'll turn it over to see if Tracy, did you have any kind of wrap-up remarks or anything you might like to share?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate all the questions. There's a lot of good questions tonight. And, you know, I just really encourage people, please reach out. If you know, as you're thinking about this, you go back, you know, if you want to look at the recording, if there's anything else you want to talk about, all these folks here listed on the contact list, I think are happy to talk to you about the work they're doing at these sites. You know, they're a really good resource. So please reach out to them if you'd like to learn more about this. And then if you'd like to just learn more about PFAS generally, you know, thanks to Mary for taking us through that that tour of the website. But please reach out to Mary or I. We can always get you to the right person. So I guess I would just say thanks to everyone for participating tonight and taking the time out to be with us tonight. So thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Tracy. And yeah, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Like I said, we'll be sharing this, posting the slides as well as the recording to our PFAS website. And to help you know when that is, we'll try to send an email out to all of you that have registered to register to attend, and we have your email address. So we'll try to shoot you out an email when it's available. If not, you know, keep an eye on the PFAS website, michigan.gov/PFAS response. Thank you all for joining us, and you know, have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.